Hello, everybody. Um, this is Eric coming to you on a Saturday night. It's 7:39 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in Ohio. Thank you to whoever is tuning in with me or watching this video. I appreciate it. I've got 5 or 6 other videos. Most of them are godly content. Tonight, I'm hitting a different note, so to speak. I want to speak on something that affects a lot of people. Something that I deal with personally, and I think you've probably all seen my mood. And you see the title of this. Something's not easy to talk about, but it's a lot easier to talk about than it is to not talk about it or to live with it. Living with it's a whole nother thing, a whole nother ball of wax. I'm obviously 55 years old. Sometime this is going to be a while, so bear with me, all right? Please bear with me. Sometime, I would say in 1984, 85, also something else. Some of this might overlap with some of the other videos I had. I want to talk about, obviously, my battle, my history with mental illness. And like I said, it's something that's kind of embarrassing almost to talk about because there's a stigma around it more than any other thing. You can have cancer, you can have heart failure, you can have MS, multiple sclerosis, you can have aneurysm or stroke, whatever. But it seems like nothing is as stigmatized as mental illness. I think it's sad. I think it's really sad, and it's sickening that some people look at someone with mental illness like they're a freak. That ain't right. Mental illness, one thing I will say about mental illness, it destroys lives. It absolutely destroys lives. You look at Robin Williams had mental illness. What could he done? Naomi Judd, mental illness. What could happen with her? Either way, I want to go back, right? 1984. I'd have been 13 going on 14. That was technically, I think, the first time I ever seen the dark clouds on the horizon that I didn't recognize as dark clouds. I just, at that age, you don't know what to think, But as I told you in the one video, I developed a couple of obsessions. One was my mom and dad dying, being without them. And the other is hell, which I think I told you about in the one video. I had obsessions with these. If I'd have been using my head at the time, I'd have realized that a lot of this stuff, I got saved. Jesus Christ became my Savior, my Lord and Savior in 1983. So a couple things happened prior to 84. Jesus becoming my Savior is one. The fact that we were idiots and played with a Ouija board is another thing. And I think these two things, there might be other mitigating circumstances. I don't know why. But I had them two obsessions, and that it's just not easy to talk about. It's not easy to sit there and look at your life, and your life is falling apart. 84 though, them obsessions, they eventually worked themselves out. I don't know if I forgot or wasn't thinking about them. My mind was. I do think that I'm a hypersensitive person. I absolutely believe I'm a hypersensitive. And my mind uses that against me to great effect, sadly. I can't get into the specifics because, frankly, it's not easy to describe exactly what I did go through. In 1985, that's when my problem really came bursting out. In full mass. That's when it really started manifesting more in 85. Um, of course, it didn't take long for my parents to catch on to see what was going on. That I was making weird movements, and occasionally I'd even hit myself. I would make these weird movements sometimes and stuff like that, and of course, they thought that I was probably. I think they thought I was on drugs at first. I think it was a big thing, especially my dad probably thought I was on drugs. And at that time, I hadn't touched a drug, not one, not marijuana, nothing. I never did. So that was 85. And, you look at all the things going on in that year, 85. I was starting high school. My brother, my big brother, who me and him were pretty close. We did a lot out together and stuff. And he went for the army in September, late August, September. And my two younger brothers were way too young to really do anything with or hang out with. I mean, my one brother would have been at the time 85. He'd have been 5 going on 6. My other brother would have been 3 going on 4. So they weren't a whole lot of help. They weren't a whole lot of comfort. And then I had my sister Gina. She was definitely tried to help. But 85 began a long run of taking me to doctors and stuff, and psychologists and psychiatrists and stuff. Began a long run of doing that to um, different, different health professionals to find out what's going on. I can't remember the first time I went to one of them, but I can remember my dad not being at all compassionate at all. My mom was a little bit compassionate, and what's really amazing is years later, 3 years later, in '88, when I finally was diagnosed, they kind of went in opposite directions. My dad became a little bit more empathetic. My mom became unempathetic. Makes no sense to me. I kind of have theories, but I'm not going to get into that. So, 85, my freshman year was hell. And the good thing about it was in December, I got a brief reprieve, so to speak. My brother came back from the army on leave. That was really nice. Helped me out. But of course, he only stayed for a month. He was gone by the time, probably the end of the first week in January, he'd have been gone again. I'd have been by myself. I, I mean, all the things were working against me. I hated getting up early. I didn't have my brother. I had this problem, this new thing that I didn't understand and didn't want. Um, so I had to deal with all these things. And I guess I didn't like my school. It didn't take me long to realize that I did not like my high school. It didn't take me long at all. So that was 85. Um, Me and my dad got into a couple of kerfuffles, as you might say. Of course, it was all him. It wasn't me. I was in no position to try and do anything back to him. He didn't. He got a little bit physically rough, to be honest with you, because he would catch me like shaking as and he'd get really angry about it. And I was in no position to do anything. I was still young. I was still impressionable. I was still afraid of him because I was at the time probably about 15. He was 46. He was still pretty much in the prime. So there's nothing I could have done. Not to mention, it was his house. I was his son. So life was not fun. Um, my sophomore year, I always say that oddly enough, my freshman year, my sophomore, my junior year of the fall. So it'd have been fall of 85, fall of 86, fall of 87, all sucked. I hated them. And then oddly enough, on the flip side, the springs of 87, 88, 89 were very good. Go figure. So one thing that changed in 86 is when I got my first job. It was a paper carrier for the Toledo Blade. Um, it was, it was kind of a little bit of a nice little slight sun ray into my life. Um, So I got my paper route, and of course, that was like a whole new avenue opened up for me. I had money now. I didn't have to rely on shoveling the snow. I didn't have to rely on. Um, I didn't have to rely on doing the lawn. I didn't have to rely on any of that. I had my own money now. I still remember the first time that I collected for all my papers. I collected from all the things. And um, I remember I came home from collecting that night. It was probably more like 1 to 2 days of collecting. I don't think it was all in one night. And then I told my mom, "Hey, I did." I did. She said, "Go ahead and go upstairs to our bedroom and put the money on our bed and count it." And she said, "Make sure you take the money out first for what you owe the blade for the papers. Take that money out first." So I did that. I went upstairs, counted what I needed, what I owed the blade for the papers, and then I set it aside. And I looked at all the money on the bed, and I remember running downstairs to my mom, and it was quite a bit. I mean, at that age, I had never seen that kind of money. I went go downstairs to my mom, and I told her, I is that money all mine? I remember asking. She was downstairs. She didn't know at the time. She said, "Well, did you put aside the money you owe the blade?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Then whatever's left is yours." And I'm like, "Yeah, this is amazing. I mean, amazing." And it was still early enough. I recall that once I put the money aside, I took my money. Of course, I gave the blade all the checks, and I took all the cash. So I remember that very night going over to Great Eastern. I remember getting food and snacks. And I got this cartoons magazine. I got a baseball mitt and a baseball. Just I was not even really. I was really not even big time into baseball, but I just decided to get a baseball mitt and a glove. Or and a baseball. So I also got some GI Joe figures. Even at that age, I just wanted to get some. So I thought, I'll get some. Of course, the thrill was gone, as the song says. I didn't have much thrill of it. So that was '86. I kept that job for up until September, and I was still dealing with my problem. Still having my episodes. There was a lot of bad times with my episodes with my dad, and catching me, not acting right. I guess the best way to call it, even though it was simply me, defense mechanism. Um, so the years went on. 87, that was the year that kind of the reinvestigation of me and my problem was reopened. Because in '87, um, I went to a trade school. I didn't stay at my school. I went to a trade school in my junior year. And originally I took up horticulture. I don't know why. I think I just wanted to get away from my school. So I didn't know what to take. So I took horticulture. I didn't realize how prissy it was. It was about flowers. It's stupid, really. It's about plants and stuff, but it's mainly about flowers. And either way, I took that, and I realized it wasn't long, about probably a week and a half, 2 weeks, I realized that this was not a good move. It was a bad mistake as far as taking horticulture. So I put in for a transfer to go to another thing, to do something else besides horticulture. Speaking of really bad moves, I decided on something called ag mechanics. This was even a bigger mess because, besides the fact that my problem was acting up, um, I felt like a stranger in a strange land. I felt like I felt very uncomfortable. So I'm trying to think. Um, that's when I started noticing these people. I would see them looking at me. They were you'd tell they were adults. They weren't like our age, like high schoolers. They kept looking at me. They would observe me, like while I was in lab, as they call it, because you had classes when you went to a trade school, and then you had lab. Lab is when you're doing your actual process of the one you're trying to get a diploma for. So I noticed these people looking at me, and I started getting really angry. I didn't like it because I didn't like to be watched. I don't think anyone likes to be watched unless they want to be watched. Like you're an actor and you act in a movie or you act in a play. Then yeah, you probably want to be watched, but not when you are in high school, not when you're dealing with something that makes it more sensitive for when people are looking at you, watching you. You don't want no one watching you. So eventually they, I remember at that time, this is how lonely my life was. I remember during lunch, I didn't have anyone to sit with. I didn't feel comfortable around people. And I remember at lunch, a lot of times I would take my lunch, which sometimes consisted of a bunch of cookies, and I would leave the lunchroom and just sometimes I'd go to the bathroom and eat. And then other times, there's another thing that would happen a lot to me. In our lab in ag mechanics, we had an M&M machine, playing M&Ms. And of course, I loved M&Ms. I still kind of like them, not as much as I used to. But I remember it was 10 cents for a handful. A lot of times by the time lunchtime would come around, I'd have almost no money left. So I'd keep going up there and probably nervous eating, probably. But either way, um, 87, that's what I done. So finally, I don't know exactly what happened. I think they called me, told me I had to talk to these people. I ended up talking to these people, found out kind of what was going on. I don't remember the whole conversation. You're going back 38 years ago now. I don't remember the whole conversation. So all I know is that um, they talked to me. So that kind of got the ball rolling, kind of like on I guess you'd say, a second run of, talking to psychiatrists and psychologists. So Pinna County, eventually, I guess I didn't know behind the scenes, said they didn't want me there. They didn't want me at Pinna County. Of course, the film was more than mutual. I didn't want to be at Pinna, right? I didn't want to be there. So I was seeing doctors and stuff, and I remember I was finally told that they didn't want me there. Chewy, oh boy, I was told that they didn't want me there. Um, and so what was amazing, you talk about ironic. Maybe it's not ironic. Maybe that's not the word. Um, you talk about kind of just amazing. They didn't know what to do with me. My school, they didn't know what to do. So it's like, they don't want him. They didn't know, they were in a scramble. They didn't know what to do. And eventually they came up with the idea that they'd let me come back. And, of course, I'd have to pick out a schedule. And I remember, this is what's amazing if you know me. I literally looked at Northwood as a means of escape. That's how bad the Pinna had gotten for me. It had gotten that bad where I looked at Northwood as relief. If you know me, as I said, that's shocking. Because there was times at Northwood I felt like a Jew going into Nazi Germany, 1939. So I go back to Northwood. The good thing is that, um, I can't even say there's a whole lot of good, because all the three classes that I couldn't stand were all still there. 88, 89, and 90, all of them were there. But that's kind of after that, after 88, 89, around that time, that was the first time, like after that, where I started noticing kind of leveling off my problem, seemed to kind of level off. And it was that way for a little bit. I'm trying to think. Of course, finally graduated, which was amazing in itself. It was a feat for me graduating, because you're looking at someone that almost never done their homework. I hardly ever done my homework. Occasionally I did, but nonetheless, I graduated in June or May of 1989, and I had needed 18 credits to graduate. That's exactly what I had. I had 18 credits. That's what I needed. And I had, as I told you, the one video, I had to take a correspondence course to make up for the half credit that I was missing. But nonetheless, I didn't have to go back to school, because I told myself, if I fail and I have to go back, I'm going to go to summer school before I go back to school. But I had it. So that was 89. Of course, I joined the Marine Corps briefly in 89. I remember going to Piqua and I told you the one video. I'm not going to get into all that again. Um, I was in Paris Island, 1989. I was only there. It was a receiving company, which was like you're there for a week and then you get into battalion. I was probably only in that maybe 2.5, maybe 3 weeks. That's it. And I I got, you know, the short time I was there, it was obviously a different experience. You're far away from home, and I was worried about what was going on. I didn't know how I was going to navigate through things because I said I was at the time I was what 18, oh well, about 19. You're still young at that age. You don't know a whole lot. You you don't know a whole lot. So either way, finally, 89. Of course, I remember getting home. Uh, the one thing I did like about was the process of getting getting your separation orders from the military. Because the last day I was there, I remember, getting on that shuttle bus, and they were taking us all out. They're going to take us to Beaufort, which was the town closest to Paris Island, and it had a bus station. So I remember them doing that, and I remember one of the things I wanted because I had money, because from my debit card, I had money from that I was able to cash in, and I remember thinking I seen people with stuff at the bus station, and I said, where'd everyone get it? All the stuff they got, all the food and everything they have. Where'd they get it? And someone was telling me, oh, there's a bunch of stores down that way. So I remember as I left, I walked out and I started going down the one way. I seen, other recruits walking back, and then some walking the same way, probably doing the same thing. I was getting ready to go get food and stuff. And I just remember, it was kind of neat being in a total foreign place, not foreign country, but a foreign place to me, Beaufort. So matter of fact, I found out that a lot of Forrest Gump was filmed in Beaufort. A little bit of trivia for you. So I remember going to a couple places. One thing I was hankering for bad was Score candy bars. I wanted some of them so bad, and I ended up finding that this it wasn't a carry out or anything. It was like just a small, like a little bit more of a fancy Dollar General type store. Uh, so I remember getting them there. I went to Piggly Wiggly. I'd never been to one of them. I got pop. Either way, I come back to the bus station. I had jerky. I'm not sure, beef jerky. I'm not sure what else I had. I had I think two 6-packs of pop. One was Coke, and one was, I believe, Dr. Pepper. I believe. I'm pretty sure it's the other one. So I remember we're all waiting, and it was kind of getting late. Finally, we got on the bus, and the bus ended up being packed. I had nowhere to sit. Whoever, if you didn't find a seat, guess what you had to do? Stand in the middle aisle. Well, I stood there for so long, and just like a lot of people were in the middle aisle like me. They started laying down in the aisles and, kind of trying to get some Z's. And that's, of course, what I did. I don't know how long it lasted. All I know is eventually when we got to Charlotte, I believe, Charlotte, North Carolina, that was when a lot of the bus pulled into the station and a lot of people got off. And I was like, yes, sweet. I didn't even know if I was supposed to stay on my bus or go to another bus. I ended up finding out that this is the bus you want to stay on. You're on the right bus, so don't switch. So either way, that was when the bus really emptied out. And I remember literally it's when you go from being in the middle aisle, cramped, people on each side, plus people in front and back, you trying to sleep. And you go from that to all of a sudden, not only do you have your own seat, but you're a seat by yourself. So it was like me, no one there. I'm like, this is awesome, So either way, 89. Like I said, I got back. The next few months it was pretty nice. I liked it. I remember the money I got from my only Marine Corps paycheck. I remember I ended up getting like 6 tapes. One was Roxette, Milli Vanilli, AC/DC Back in Black. Who else did I get? Gosh, I can't remember some of the other. Maybe Night Ranger, Greatest Hits. I can't remember. So I remember the night getting back because My dad picked me up, and me and him, the last time me and him had talked to each other, was not on good terms. Um, but we patched things up. I, of course, came back to the house. I was excited to see my little baby sister, Brittany. She would have been at the time not even quite 2 years old, not even quite 2 years old yet. And I ended up getting her a present. I ended up getting Shane and Chad presents, my brothers. Um, I ended up getting them presents, and I started settling in. And of course, I remember my sister at the time. My sister Gina was not living at the house. She was living out in a certain area, Bay Shore, I believe it was called. She was living out there, and I went a lot of times. I'd stay out there, and of course, I'd always have to take my music on my tapes and my stereo. And I just remember a song I was really obsessed with at the time was a song by Roxette, that Look Sharp album, a song called Paint. I remember I was very obsessed with that song. There's something about it had a ethereal feel to it. Uh, so I kind of liked that, and I was listening to that a lot. My sister liked Roxette too, so we both, a lot of. She lived out in Bay Shore, and she, of course, went to her room, go to bed at night, and I just stay out there and stay up for a while and listen to music, and then of course eventually I'd fade off to bed, but fade off to sleep. So either way, that went on for a while. Um, the mid '90s. I'm just going to go to the mid '90s. In '93, my problem came back. I mean, it really seemed like for a while. '89, 90, 91. It was there, but it was not as pronounced. But in '93, it seemed to really come back pretty strong, which was, of course, very troubling to me. So, um, 93, and see, 94, 95, me and my brother were in a trailer up in the north end of Toledo. My problems off and on, like I said. But what I'm going to get to now is um, the early 2000s or the late 90s, early 2000s, which was when really I was probably, unfortunately, setting myself up for a pretty bad fall. By that time, I had taken drugs, even though I stopped in '99, never did them again. But I also had a pretty bad lust problem, as I told you before. Um, I remember in '99, of course, my family moved from the Toledo area to Lima. And my brother was over in one house he was in. My sister was living in I believe, the apartment she lived in. But there was no central point where, like, when my parents lived in the area, where we could all congregate. It was all different, three different places. And me and my brother were both going through our own problems. Mine wasn't as bad as his was at the time. His was worse at that time. I remember um, I started having a problem at night. Um, I'd be lonely, big shock. I'd be lonely, and that's a lot of times what would get me into trouble, was being lonely and not knowing what to do, just like, because at this time I was still kind of hanging out with, I had been hanging out with my friends over the other side of town, the ones that were a bad influence. I had been still hanging out with them, but around the time of middle to late spring of '99, I pretty much cut ties with them. I was trying to lead a Christian life, and I thought, I can't be around these guys. These guys are not a good influence. They do drugs, they drink, they have not seen nothing wrong with Playboy, and I liked Playboy a lot. I really did. So I got rid of them as friends. And I felt bad about it because we had some good times, but it just wasn't meant to be anymore. So that was '99, 2000. 2000 was the first time I remember. Let's see, you have to pay attention, but this is where I feel like things started slowly. That's one thing I'll say, and I've said it before in these videos. The demons are so intelligent. They have all the time in the world. They are so crafty. You think everything's all right because they come at you. They don't always come at you, boom, full fledged like that in your face. They don't always do that. A lot of times it's small, little increments, baby steps, little compromises and stuff. That's how they get you. So 2000, I remember me and my brother had left the Toledo area because this one house we were at, I told you the one house, the greenhouse we were at. And me and my brother ended up moving. We ended up staying, kind of went back and forth between Bluffton and Lima. When he went back the last time, when we was in Lima, I remember my brother was at the hotel. I remember him telling me that, you know, I think I'm going to go back home, And I, of course, I didn't know what to say. I felt bad about, oh, you gotta stay with me. I felt bad because he was the one who was paying for everything. I felt bad about it. I didn't want him to leave, but I thought, I can't make it always thinking about me. So it was sometime, I believe, in, it was probably June, that finally he went back. He said, he told me, I will we'll find a place you can stay. And so we ended up finding a storage unit. And that storage unit ended up, it was, I didn't realize how short of a stay I was going to have there. I got this storage unit, and I remember I had gotten a job already that quick. I was going to work at Arby's. And I remember that day, finally I got up in the morning. I was asleep because I remember that night I think it rained. And I had my little lamp in there, it's like a gas type lamp. I don't know how to put it. And I had some, I believe, should I have music in there too? I don't know. All I know is I was doing a lot of writing at the time. What are you going to do late at night in the middle of nowhere? You're in a storage unit. The door's shut, of course, and you're sitting there just, what else can you do if you can't fall asleep? So I, um, I wake up the next day, and I remember, um, one of the first things I see is these people over by this dumpster, where there was a dumpster close to the storage unit, and there were people. You could tell they were doing some kind of work or whatever. And I thought, I can't walk out. They see me, even though they probably wouldn't even recognize me. But I was kind of paranoid, so I kept staying there, kept waiting. And I thought, man, I said, I'm gonna have to be. I didn't know what time it was at the time. I had no idea what time it was. So I thought, well, I'm gonna have to make a move here pretty soon. Finally, they did end up leaving, so I ended up walking because I had to work that day. And as I'm walking down the road, I didn't realize how long it was of a walk. And I thought, you know, there's no way that my parents, eventually they're going to be driving by, they're going to see me, and they're going to be like, what the heck's he doing down here? Why didn't Chad tell us? So I remember I ended up thinking, this just ain't going to work. So I ended up stopping off at Meyer, and I ended up calling the house and imitating someone else and asking my brother to come to the phone. I had imitated some other voice, and it was my brother came to the phone. I told him, come and get me. I said, this ain't going to work. Of course, he didn't know why. He wasn't sure, understood why. So he he came, and then we had decided I'm going to go back to Bluffton. We went back to Bluffton. Um, I got a storage unit there, even though this one was a lot bigger. And basically set up this storage unit in Bluffton. Or wait a minute, you know what? Now that I think about it, I think we originally got that storage unit, yeah, before we even went to Lima, because that's where all the stuff was at. And I know I didn't have any stuff in that small storage unit. It wouldn't have been big enough for anything, just me. So we must have got it before I went back to Bluffton, like when we were there the first time. So I went to that storage unit, started staying there. Good thing was I got a job pretty quickly at Burger King. Um, this was a very bad run. I did not like it at all. My storage unit, I would go there, and Burger King was literally right, like about, I don't know, about maybe 75 yards in front of the storage unit. So I could wake up, throw on my shirt, and pretty much walk to work, just like that. And that's what I'd done for a while. So I did that for a while, and it was that way for I don't know how long. Eventually, I ended up getting enough money where I stayed in this hotel for like 1 or 2 weeks when I got a paycheck. Well, what the problem ended up happening was this Burger King was pathetic and they were horribly staffed. And I remember the one night they just kept wanting us to stay. I was getting tired. I was like, I'm getting tired, you know. And there was like literally only about three or four of us, and there was hardly no one else. Maybe people in the first shift, but third shift it seemed like it was all us, like me and a couple other ones. And I was just getting. I remember that day I was so tired. I was so tired, so I ended up leaving that night without asking. I just like they're not gonna let me go. So I ended up leaving that night. And of course, I, I was in big trouble then because I had no job. I remember scrambling to try and find a different job. I filled out an application at McDonald's the next day. But either way, eventually, I remember this is the very first time this happened. I started breaking up. Started like almost having a panic attack because I was in that, and my problem had started in. So I was late at night. I don't know, the morning sometime. Not like 6 in the morning, more like 3 or 4 in the morning. And I remember I went to a payphone and I called 911. Called the ambulance, yeah, 911. I called them. They sent a cruiser, police officer. I didn't know what to say, So he comes and I'm kind of emotional at the time because I'm dealing with I don't know how to deal with this. So he asks what's going on, and I tell him and everything. He says okay, and then he gets out of the car. I think he checked me out, put me in the back, and he I forget he was asking me on the way, "Are you from here?" or something like that. I pretty much told him no, I'm not from here. So he takes me to the Bluffton Hospital. This is the first time I've been to the hospital for my problem. First time. And I remember him going there and they said, we don't have facilities like for a psych unit. We don't have them kind of facilities. So you're going to have to take him to Lima. So that very night, he took me to Lima. I can't remember, though. What I can't remember is if I went to St. Rita's or I went to Lima Memorial. But all I know is where I went, they questioned me for, geez, an hour and a half. They were probably trying to see, hey, you suicidal? Is probably what they were wanting to find out. So nonetheless, they ended up releasing me, and a cab took me to the rescue home in Lima Rescue Home. And I thought, okay. And I was so scared. I remember, even though at the time I'd have been what at the time, 29 probably. But, when you get in a certain state in life, when you get in a certain state in your mind, you can almost revert back to being a kid. If you get to a certain fear factor, you start almost becoming a shell of your former self. And I was pretty much there at that time, still in that, unfortunately. So I remember I stayed at the rescue home about 2 months, I believe. I believe it was August and September. Because I remember I went back the very first day of October to my brother's place. We ended up going to Toledo, me, my brother, my younger brother, not the youngest, my younger brother, and then my sister and me ended up, maybe even, it might have been actually both my brothers. I ended up meeting him at Taco Bell because I said, I want to go back home. So I ended up going back home. And as I said, I stayed with my brother for a while until I ended up finding another place. Um, that was then. Unfortunately, I didn't realize that this had basically rung in um, a new era in my life, a bad era, a very bad era. It's like you ever heard the saying, going from bad to worse, going from worst to worst. That's how my life was. So I see 2001 and 2001. Me and my brother, my older brother, who I ended up kind of going back and forth with. I stayed with him, then stayed with a friend, then went back to my brother's place, and back there then, and then he ended up losing his job because he didn't have a. I mean, he ended up losing the apartment because he didn't have a job. So he, boy, I tell you. He tried to get a job, tried to scramble to get a job, but it didn't work out. He didn't get it in enough time. And basically, the new landlords were jerks, really jerks. They literally sent the bailiff there and some other people in the morning. The one morning the last day supposed to be there. So after that all happened, we thought, well, we might as well go to Lima. So back to Lima. and um, go down there. I, of course, didn't know what to do. I was didn't really want to go back to the mission. Um, so I stayed. I would hang out at places at night, like Meyer or Arby's at night. I would just stay and hang out. I didn't a lot of like Meyer. I didn't buy anything. I didn't have hardly any money. So Meyer and Arby's, but eventually, of course, I was able to get a place to stay. My aunt let me stay with her. My and that would have been like probably December, January, February. I think it's like 3 months. She eventually grew tired, and it wasn't so much that she didn't like me or I was doing anything to hurt her. She just didn't feel she has OCD really bad too. You know, genetics, I guess. She had OCD, and so I ended up leaving. Ended up going back to doing the one thing I was doing, staying at places like Meyer and Arby's, and then I still remember the one night me, my brother, and a person he had met, some dude he had met at the rescue home. And we were driving around one night, and this car was behind us. I remember, and finally we realized it was my brother. It was my brother, my two brothers and sister, and they one thing led to another. I don't know where we pulled over at. We were talking. I ended up getting in the car with him, and then I think he said, "We got something to show you." Or it ended up being he ended up renting out an apartment for his business. They said, "You can stay there in the meantime. Go ahead and stay there, and kind of watch it for me." So I liked that because I didn't have to stay at the mission, the rescue home. So I go there, but unfortunately, one thing about my problem is when I'm alone, it's not good. It's not good. That was the second time in December of 2002 that I started, um, that I went to the psych unit again. I mean, this time I actually went. I didn't just get have a police officer take me there and get released. I actually was admitted. That was 2002 December. Matter of fact, no, never mind. Then it was only a matter of 2 months later, 2 or 3 months later, in 2003, like February. I remember because the spaceship shuttle Columbia had blown up on reentry, had went to pieces. I was there at the rescue home, or I was there at the hospital again 2 times in the period of 2 months. Or wait a minute, 2 times in the period of 3 months. 3 months, excuse me. And that's a lot to swallow. 2 times in 3 months. I mean, I always had the utmost confidence. I said, God, eventually, hopefully, this will end. Um, so you go through the years, and in '04, I didn't have a whole lot of problems, but I do remember, unfortunately, kind of seeing more clouds on the horizon in late '04. So I remember it was the elections, and we were kind of going to help the elections out. Bush was running against Kerry, I think. Yeah, John Kerry. But we were there, and I remember after a couple months later, after the elections had all been done, and everything, I remember um, ended up going to the hospital again. I was they let me stay there for a little bit. No one ever came back and processed me. No one came back and said, "Hey, we want you to answer all these questions." Like usually they'll ask you all kinds of questions. I just sit there for a while. I said, I'm not feeling it maybe as bad as I thought I was. So, and I said, I'm not going to wait here forever. I took off. Well, I go back home, and I don't know how much longer it was after that we got a knock at the door, or the doorbell rung. It ended up being a police officer, and I ended up going with him because I knew, it's futile to fight him. So I ended up going with him, and I was admitted that day. And it's almost like, rubber ball or bouncing back and forth like a ping pong, because that was like, I believe in, say, April, I think, '05. And then 6 months later, November '05, I'm back there again. Yes, again. It'd been my fourth time. And I'm like, 4 times in the period of what? Um, 3 years? '02, '03, '04, well, maybe 4 years. That's a lot of times to be admitted to a certain unit in a period of about 4 years, probably less than 4 years. So that was '05. And I remember November of '05. Um, One thing about my problem, unfortunately, is for the longest time it would kind of come and go, and I don't know what's going on now. I really don't know. I can't even put my head around what's going on with my problem, if that makes any sense. Either way, it was '05, and I remember when I got out of the hospital that time, they set me up at the a hotel in town for about a week. Of course, they said after that, of course, you're going to have to pay, which was, I understand. So excuse me, I ended up staying at that hotel, and I knew that I got to get my own place, and at that time, at least, um, I was trying to get back to work. All I know is, I remember I had to meet my caseworker, and she gave me some good news. She said, "You're supposed to call this number on a certain day." She said, "Make sure you call that number." She said, "We'll have a place for you to stay." And I was like, "That's good," It was because it was the first week of December. And I remember I had it was about 3 or 4 days. It said, call on this day. It was a Saturday, I remember. And I remember I ended up going to the bowling alley. I was walking around that day like I did a lot, just ended up calling, and then they said, "Oh, okay, yeah, we know who you are," and they basically said, "Come on over whenever you're ready." And it ended up being like a group home. Like there was like a bunch of apartments next to each other, and I can't remember what the name was of the apartment. The the Elms or Elmcroft. I don't know what it was called. Um, I remember getting there, and basically the people that ran it were like they'd have one person that might be more have seniority at the apartment, and they basically just um, you got your room and whatever, you went there, and either way, I remember um, well, I ended up staying there December, January, February, and then in sometime around late February, my brother got orders to go because he worked for a security company, go to New Orleans for after the hurricane because it was '06. And so my brother was like, okay. And then I guess they asked, "Do you haven't know anyone else who would like to work?" Me and my one brother said, "Yeah." So ended up leaving there to go all the way down to New Orleans within like a day's time. Um, um, I was gonna say, let me think here. Sorry about it. Sometimes I get distracted. Um, I ended up going to New Orleans. We ended up staying down there about 3 months. Um, and I remember once again, unfortunately, it was around springtime when I was getting ready to leave. We were to come back for my sister's graduation to watch her graduate. And I remember right before I was getting ready to leave, because we had moved to the French Quarter, I remember thinking to myself, I can feel something happening. I say, is this what I think it's going to be? Is it what I think it's going to be? I could tell it was my problem in the background, so to speak, kind of percolating, getting ready to ruin my life again. So it was '06. So we ended up going home. Um, and my problem really started in earnest again, '06, spring. So for the next 4 or 5 months, I was basically persona non grata, you might say. I didn't do anything. I started becoming reclusive as usual. So that went on for like about 4 or 5 months, literally. I remember the time I came out of it, the bad dark hole, you might say, was oddly enough, it was like in the early fall. It's weird how this thing ends, how it just all of a sudden will just dissipate. It's not easy to think about. So that was '06. And then, the rest of the year it was fine, everything like, October, November, December, fine. January, February. Once again, 2007 comes along. Guess what? 2007, my problem started in again. It was a doozy that time. I remember spring of '07. I ended up having to go to the hospital again. Now this time they they uh, they admitted me. I stayed for a little over a week, and when I got out this time, I wasn't all better. I ended up going back to the house, and I remember finally trying to decide I was going to go to some ministry, apostleship or whatever, that was it's supposed to be in Chillicothe. It was called the Refuge. That's what I was going to do. Um, I ended up going, but they thought that the program, because this program wasn't didn't cost any money, they didn't think the program was right for me. They suggested something else. They said you can still go, but we don't think it's right for you. So I ended up going with. I ended up leaving that day. I didn't end up going to their house to kind of get the process started. So that was then finally is when the day I actually went to the hospital a second time within the period of about 3 weeks. And this time, though, they didn't admit me. They thought of a place for me to go. It's called the Renaissance. It was a place, a living unit where you could stay with people who have problems, like people have problems. And so I ended up staying there. I ended up staying there for almost 3 months. Now, during this time, I did get better. I did get better. I remember. Um, I ended up staying at a place in Marion Street, in the city, after, because they were trying to find me a place, trying to find desperately to find me an apartment, and they couldn't find anything. So they just said, let's stick them in this another place that people live at. That was all right, and thank God though that it wasn't much longer that my problem wasn't there. I would say by the time probably December came around, I was feeling quite a bit better. Um, but this problem is a bitch. It's a real bitch. I've been noticing, by the way, update from my happy counter. How many times I've been admitted? I believe it's 7 or 8 times I've been admitted to the hospital. Um, I don't know why. I don't know why, and I don't know what. It bothers me more that I ain't being helped more, but it still bothers me a little bit that I don't know why, the reasons. Um, I'm trying to navigate. It's like, if you can imagine navigating through a minefield. Navigating through a minefield. You don't know anything about the minefield. You don't know where the mines are at. And you got to navigate through there. Any minute, boom, one can blow up. I've been seeing these. I've seen this one paragraph from this one person that was suffering from like anxiety attacks. And what she said struck a chord with me so much. I mean, it really struck a chord. I'm like, I understand this. Anxiety is only part of what I deal with, but I understand it, because she was talking about, she said everything became a task for her, and that's how my life is. Everything became a task for her. Going to the store, she said she'd wait in the car, wait for the right moment to go in where she felt safe. That's very much kind of how I am. Looking at every person, feeling like you're in danger, which makes no sense, but don't ask me. Which is ironic. I'm the only one you could ask about your mind. And I'm the one that should know the most, and I don't know any more than you probably know. I have ideas to why it started, only ideas. I don't know um, why it continues to stay. Um, if you're out there watching, stay away from lustful materials, stay away from drugs, stay away from the occult, all of it. Ouija boards, all that crap. Lusting, believe it or not, masturbation is sin. And people think, oh, as long as I don't fornicate before marriage. No. Flogging the old bishop, that's lusting. That's why it falls under lusting. Because most time when a guy does the one thing, he's thinking of a beautiful woman. So it's lusting. Your sexual idolatry. You're making an idol of a beautiful woman. Now, yeah, you could say it's their fault too, because they're posing. You're right, it is their fault too. And then drugs, obviously, is the other one. And these are only conjectures as far as what I think. But the only thing I'm happy about is I know that we're getting close to the end. The Lord is about ready to blow that trumpet. I hope all of you, whoever watches this, I hope every last one of you are saved, that you come to a saving knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the only one that can save you, the only name given under heaven to which we might be saved. So with that, I'm going to bid you farewell. Um, God bless. I'll see you again sometime.